So we're looking at Unit 2 today, and this is delivering education and training. And there's 5 learning outcomes in this today. So the first learning outcome is be able to use inclusive teaching and learning approaches in accordance with internal and external requirements. Learning outcome 2 is be able to communicate with learners and other learning professionals to promote learning and progression. Learning outcome 3, be able to use technologies in delivering inclusive teaching and learning. Learning outcome 4, be able to implement the minimum core when delivering inclusive teaching and learning. And then learning outcome 5, be able to evaluate your own practice in delivering inclusive teaching and learning. So we're focusing on learning outcome 1, and we've got 3 points we're going to cover. So 1.1, analyze the effectiveness of teaching and learning approaches used in your own area of specialism in relation to meeting the individual needs of learners. Then 1.2, create an inclusive teaching and learning environment. And 1.3, demonstrate an inclusive approach to teaching and learning in accordance with internal and external requirements. So after that, I'm out of breath and I'll go on to the right point. There you go. Let's put this onto a slideshow for you, and there we go. So the aim of this unit is just here to help you to use inclusive teaching and different learning approaches so that you can work towards the internal processes and the external requirements that you have. It will help you to communicate with your learners, and again, also to evaluate your own delivery practice. You'll notice within this course itself, there's a high stress on evaluating your own self. So you will look at some point in each unit that will be talking about you evaluating or looking back or reflecting on how you do. It'll also help you to get an understanding of how technology can enhance teaching and learning. And if we talked about this a couple of years ago, I would have really struggled with this little section. But now we know that this will be highly focused on learning outcome 2. But we know we've had a year and a half almost, or almost 2 years, of learning online. So there's a lot of things that you'll already be familiar with about how to communicate with your students and how to support them through technology. So 1.1 is analyze the effectiveness of teaching and learning approaches used in own area of specialism in relation to meeting the individual needs of learners. Now, I remember that some students can get a little bit confused when it says specialism. You start thinking, oh, but I don't have a specialism within work. What is my specialism? Your specialism is the fact that you work in a primary. If you were in a high school, that would be a specialism. If you were in a sixth form or a specialist school. So specialism is just a broad sense of, because you focus a different style of teaching on the younger ones, don't you? So primary will be specialism for you. So when we're looking at this, it's quite essential that teachers, and I know we focus a lot on teachers on here, but I'd say associate staff as well, meet the individual needs of learners that use a lot of different learning approaches. And there are different learning approaches that we're going to talk about today. But the learning approaches and the teaching approaches that you use will vary. It really looks at what your own teaching style is. It even looks at what your own learning style is. Sometimes if you learn in a particular way, I know I'm a visual learner, and whenever I've carried out any learning style questionnaire, if I'm ever getting my students to fill out something or do any questionnaires, I'll make sure I do them first. And 99% of them show that I'm a visual style learner. And in that way, I try to set things up. So when I'm doing my PowerPoints or presentations or I'm doing resources, I try to set them up in a way that is easy to do. So you do sort of reflect on how you learn. That is how you approach things yourself as well sometimes. So different ways to teach can be, you can do certain things like, you can do group discussions, you might be differentiated activities, you might do differentiated language, you've got different abilities of students, you've got different ages of students. So if you're talking to somebody in year 5 on maths work, you can talk to them about multiplication and division and all that. But with a younger child, you might say halves, or what is this, add this. You know, you change the language you talk.
Yeah.
The difficulty of the topic you're talking about. So you might be doing, I remember doing a lesson in maths, and for some of the students we used PowerPoint for all of them, but for some of them we took them to the side and we physically showed them a few maps, and we made a smaller activity sheet with a very small area of a map to say the area that I'm in, just to show where's the school, where's the church, there's a church next to us, where's the shopping centre because that's close to us. So we made it a lot smaller so they could just focus on these 3 points. But with the children that had a higher ability, we had it where the maps that we showed them were to do with the broad area where we lived. So they could see where is the park, whereabouts, which street do they think they live on, and that type of things. Again, you'll use presentations or PowerPoints. You'll have those in the daily things on your interactive whiteboard. You're always using them. You've got games that you'll use. So there'll be different things that you will use. So that is just a broad sense of that's how you physically use things, how you're actually using your own approaches to adapt, to be inclusive and, to meet your needs of your learners. But we're going to look at something a bit more formal now, and that will be teaching styles. So pedagogy, and this is Androgogy is how we say it, but I always refer to Androgogy. I don't know why I do that. So pedagogy and Androgogy. So pedagogical principles. So what is pedagogy? So pedagogy, again, is just about how you teach. It's your method and your practice of teaching. It looks at all of the different teaching styles. So you look at feedback and assessment and teacher theories. Now, pedagogy is more for children. So I'd say from early years up to key stage 4, I think. And you could probably even put it into colleges and sixth forms as well. Now, when you look at pedagogy, it's just a different way, or it's a reference to a way of how teachers work on a daily basis, how they deliver their content, how they look at the curriculum, and how they transfer it to work towards their students. So it's what you do just to adapt to your students. So it's just a broad sense. With pedagogy, you're going to make educational decisions. So pedagogy is a decision-making process. It just describes how teachers, teaching staff, associates, how they make decisions about what sort of curriculum. Now, with the national curriculum, everybody's got a certain set of standards for each year. So for year 1, you've got your national curriculum in math, science, English, you've got it in IT. The science isn't that focused on at the moment, but you've got it in certain areas in spelling and grammar, in phonics, and you have certain points where you're meant to be teaching these, and then you've got expectations where you've got your meets expectations, exceeds expectation, or is below. But you're working against a particular set of standards.
Yeah.
But even though you've got that curriculum there, you've got the national curriculum, it's up to you how you teach it. So you've got certain points to teach, but you're not actually told how to bring it across. That's up to you as a teacher. So, or it's up to your team within that year or your management within your school about how you focus on it. So within this, you use pedagogy, so you're making decisions about how you're teaching that curriculum. So I've got set points that I need to teach, but I'll do it a slightly different way for this group, and I'll do it slightly different way for this group. So you've got that leeway, you've got that freedom there. Now, pedagogy is also an academic discipline. So it's about the study of how the knowledge and skills are imparted. So how you're passing on the knowledge and skills. Again, you've got a certain set of standards, but you know that you're going to pass it on in a particular way. And then you've got the theory and practice of pedagogy, and they reflect on this. Really look at what sort of context you're in. So they look at your social environment, your political environment, your cultural context. So again, it works really well into inclusion and diversity here, because you're really looking at the needs of your learners before you even start planning anything. Now, you do have, for example, if there was a teacher that's been in year 5 or 6 years now, they're going to find it a lot easier to do certain things because they've got a system that's already set up. This is why teachers like staying within their own within a particular year for a few years at a time. Because the first year they struggle where they're trying to get everything set up, but then they've done it already, and you know that the curriculum it might change slightly, but it's not going to change so drastically that you're going to have to redo everything. So it gets easier and easier, and then say first year you struggle, second year you're going to be much better at doing differentiating. Third year, fourth year, fifth year. That's why we like to stay where we are.
Yeah.
Then you've got the history of pedagogy. So pedagogy is from Greek words. So it means child, and agogos means leading. So it's child leading on here. It just also means that it's the art and science of teaching children. So like I mentioned before, pedagogy is very good for young learners or young adults, so up until like college or maybe even university age. Now, this model has been adapted a few times and it's been reinforced, but it goes through a lot of elementary schools in Europe and North America, so primary schools. But there's not much knowledge about this learning because we've got, when it comes to adult learning, this doesn't really apply to that because up until World War II, adult learning wasn't a very big thing. After that, it became quite a big thing. So it doesn't really reflect on adult learning here. Now, we've got drawbacks of it. So when the adult education began to be organized in the 1920s, a lot of issues came up. So teachers of any adults were experiencing quite a few problems with pedagogical models. And it's because pedagogy is based on the fact that education is just a transmittal of knowledge and skills. But when you're teaching young children and you're giving them step by step and you're just giving them information, you teach them in a different way. And I know this firsthand now, where the way I taught my younger ones at school, it was a completely different way I was teaching them. The way I'm teaching adults now is a completely different ballpark now about how I work. And I'll explain what I mean in a moment. So when you have, with the adult learners, they felt that this type of teaching was insufficient because when you're in a classroom environment, you're there in front of the classroom or you're sitting next to your student and you're just sort of passing the information on to them and you set them to task. You're not really asking them to think about it too much. You're teaching them about the rainforest and you give them some slides, you show them a presentation, you do a couple of games, you give them some activities and you say, right, here you go, answer these questions. And they've got that basic knowledge off your slides and off your presentations of what you told them and they're getting on with it. They can memorize things, they can do quizzes, they can make little notes off what you told them, but they're not really questioning things, are they? You might get the odd one asking a particular question about things, but it's a different style of learning. But now, as a student, Geeta, now you've come into this. If I was just giving you information and expecting you to just go ahead, make a note, listen to my lecture, look at this, read this, do a quiz, memorize this, and all this, it's going to be different because you want to ask questions, you want to know why, you want deeper knowledge, and so you're more confident because you're doing this willingly, aren't you? And you do want to know what the ins and outs of things are. Some things will make sense to you, some things won't make sense, and you're like, can you explain that clearly? So it's more you-led, isn't it? It's more focused on you motivating yourself and me there to help you in that journey. So we're more interactive in this case. So if we're doing pedagogical studies, it's not going to work. Now, adult learners felt that it was insufficient because they were attending lectures or looking at readings and quizzes, trying to do memorized notes or take part in examinations, but they were dropping out because these were not the best way for them to study. Now, teachers also found that there were assumptions about the characteristics of learners in pedagogical models which don't fit the adult students. So pedagogy is fantastic for young ones, but for adults it's not a great idea. So which is where we come to Androgogy. So what is Androgogy? Now, again, quite simple, and we mentioned it, I think, a couple of weeks ago. We talked about it ever so slightly. And it's just the method and practice of teaching adult learners within adult education. So I found this image, I quite liked this, because this is an adult learner here. And they've come into study because they want to progress in life, or they want to get career enhancement, or they just got a general interest in a certain area, or they might want to change careers. So you've got a need to know things, you're motivated, you're quite orientated, you're very self-directed, because no one's forcing you to do anything, you're wanting to do it yourself. You have a lot of different experience. Now, you'll probably find this course quite nice to go across because you've got that work experience. If I try teaching this course to, say, a 17-year-old, where they don't have the same experience as you do, they won't be able to do as many examples, because there's a very high-led example right in here where almost every question I'll ask you to answer will be, can you support it with an example? So with you, you can. And you're actually quite ready to learn, aren't you? So you're get going, you're like, I just want to get on with it. I know what I'm doing and I'm keen to finish this so I can go into my next step.
Yeah.
Then we've got the history of this. So this was, Androgogy was coined by somebody called Alexander Kapp in 1833. He's a German teacher. So it's also a Greek word, and it stems on andros, which is why André is on there, and it means man, not boy, so adult. And then agogos means leader of, so it means just for adult education. It's fantastic. So Androgogy was introduced in the United States in 1927 by Martha Anderson and Edward Lindemann, but they didn't develop the concept, they just ran with it the way it is, and they were fine with that. So the goal of adult education is self-actualization. Now, I've done a lot of CPD and enhancement in my adult life. I went to uni when I was 17, 18, 19, and the things that I've learned now, if I had this type of common sense now, that I had, if I could have had this then it would have been such a different play of what I did. But which is why adult education is fantastic, because it really gives you that chance to achieve what you want to. So I'm a firm believer of it. So the mission of adult education educators is just, we're here to help you, to assist you, develop you, to get you to meet that point where you want. So if you say to me, I want to get this course done in 6 months, I'll give you a very fast-paced teaching. If you say to me, no, actually, I'm not ready for the next unit yet, I'm going to work one by one. When I give you my assignment, then let's set up the next lesson. I'll work with you in that way as well. So it really is, for us here as educators, just to help you learn the way you want to help you to achieve what you want without overwhelming you. So to conclude, Androgogy is adult-focused teaching, and it's very motivational because it's quite self-led and self-directed, and we're just here as a support for you. We'll help you with what you need, we'll teach you the material, and then you sort of go off on your own within that. And when you need help, you'll come back to us, but really it's very self-led and motivational. Pedagogy is child-focused teaching, is where it's very teacher-led. It's very parent-led. So you're working, giving information to the kids, you're sending out homework, you're expecting the adults to help them. So it's more of a child-focused way in that. It's a different approach. Do you have any questions to go over on here?
One thing, whether it's a Androgogy or pedagogy, it's like still, the lessons or curriculum need to be planned, what to teach, how to teach, isn't it?
Yes.
Is it not common thing in both?
It is a common thing in both because you get a set of standards in both. So within these, now I'm doing this NCFE course for you. Now, with this, I'm creating the PowerPoints as we go along. I'm trying to get everything done. But whenever I'm doing the lesson planning for here, I have a set of standards. Again, I know what needs to be taught and what needs to be done. With the national curriculums, they'll tell you, for example, maths, you need to teach shapes. And there's no right or wrong way. You know, you can teach a different type of shapes and corners, and you know how many flat faces there are, what curves, you know, those type of things to that. You've got a little bit more of a leeway. But with these ones, the courses that I've done over OTHM, NCFE, and ATHE, with these, I found that they're quite strict. There's a particular NCFE aren't that bad. They work with a set of standards they give you and say, right, as long as it's focusing on this area, we're okay. But with the other courses that I do, they are very focused on you have to teach these particular points. When the student does their assignment, these are the particular points we're looking for. If these points are not in the assignment, they don't pass it. So it's a bit more focused.
Okay.
With the national curriculum, it is focused as well, but you've got more leeway. But with the other courses that I'm teaching on ATH and OTHM, I've noticed that they're very strict about what they do, and they're like, no, this is what you're going to do, and make sure you teach on these lines, otherwise we're not going to accept their work. So I've noticed that the focus is a little bit more driven on the adult education. But again, that's only my experience with the limited courses that I've done. So I teach about 5-6 different courses, and within these, that is what I've noticed. It might be different for others, but that's my perception at the moment.
Okay.
So like you, I'm still learning. It's one of those things that you're continuously going on and on. Did that help, the answer?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you're answering this on here, so I want you to analyze your own teaching approaches. So look at what your teaching approach is. You just say, this is what I do. So you could say, because you're working with children, so I am a pedagogical, I use pedagogical teaching. And then you just say, how do you teach? So you probably have a lot of times where you're doing interventions or taking the class over for, you said you take over sometimes for maths. So what do you do? How do you help them? You've got a lot of different students in your classroom with different needs. Some have got more demanding needs. Some might be a little bit. I remember I had a child that was demanding in a way that he was extremely bright. You'd set the work, he wouldn't finish talking. I'd give the sheets out to everyone, and he'd be done 5 minutes later. And then I was working with his mum as well on through my adult teaching as well. And she's like, he gets bored. He wasn't. He just sat there and he'd be really quiet, but he would be like, oh yeah, go and do this, go and help this the child. So in the end, I started making additional sheets, and I'd make sure that I had a good pile of sheets that he could go through. So what would take some students a full lesson to get through 5-6 questions, he could do about 10 to 20, even more, quite complicated questions within that lesson. So you adapt. What do you do to help them? And then talk about how do you actually teach, what resources do you use. Sometimes you use iPads. If there's a child that is known to have a small attention span, do you give them 10 minutes of work, 10 minutes of iPad, and come back onto work? What do you do? Do you take them onto a water area, or do you let them play with a particular toy or something? What do you do with them?
Okay.
And again, what principles do you use on a daily basis? So how do you, when we just say principles, just what acting are you doing on a daily basis? What are you physically doing to support your learnings? Do you have your learners, sorry? Do you have interventions or one-to-one work? Do you differentiate? Do you do group work? Do you do independent work? Now, I know some students struggle a lot, so what we used to do was we'd group up a child who was a little bit, say, at a higher standard with another child that could verbally answer, but they might not be able to read the work. So they'd support each other. The one that was confident when reading would read the questions, and the other one would contribute and say, right, yeah, I think this is the answer. So group work or independent work. Do you give handouts? Do you do activity sheets, workbooks, PowerPoints? What do you do? I remember a colleague of mine, I was speaking to her about a week ago, and we were talking about approaches to different learners, about if they have dyslexia or dyscalculia, any of those type of things. And she mentioned that she was doing a lesson where one student had dyslexia, but she was getting, when dyslexia, if you use like different coloured paper, the work, especially yellow and black, they go well. So it suited
Yes.
her when she had yellow worksheets. But my colleague went and spoke to her once, and she said, why do you always, what's the matter? You're not looking at your sheets properly. And the learner was like, I feel like I'm being singled out, that I'm the only one that gets this yellow one, and everybody else has those white sheets, and it feels like I'm being... So what my colleague did after that for the next sessions, she just print everybody's work out on yellow paper, just so she felt included. And it wasn't that case that she's doing her inclusion, but she's not singling her out either. So it's not like everybody needs to know this person has dyslexia. This is what we're doing. So there's little things that we can do to support them. So are you okay with 1.1?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to 1.2. Here, all you're doing is creating an inclusive environment. So create an inclusive teaching and learning environment. So we know inclusion is very popular in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland and so on. Even the national curriculum says that we need to ensure all of our learners are getting effective learning, regardless of what their needs are. But how can we actually do this? What does it mean? And how do we do this so it benefits all our students? So no matter what the individual needs are, how can we do it? Now, sometimes we know there's certain things we need to do, but we're so strapped on time, it can be so difficult trying to plan one activity with differentiation for like 5, 6, 7 different needs. But again, it's something that we need to do so that you're not having someone confused or worried or feeling left out. Now, I was doing, before I get into this, I was doing a lesson for level 5 with diploma in education and teaching yesterday. And I've got a nurse who is studying with us, and she's also a trainer. And now she mentioned that she had a student in her class. They were all adult learners. And she was doing formulas, some mathematical formulas. And she was saying that she noticed him, and she went up to him and she said, are you struggling with maths? Because he wasn't really keeping up with the work. And he comes out and he says to her, no, I'm not struggling with maths. It's the fact is that I've got really poor eyes and I can't see anything on a bright background or white background. So the PowerPoints that you're doing and the lights that are in the class, they're really affecting how much I can see because it's blurring his eyes. So she closes the blinds and it doesn't make a difference. So at tea break, they go out an hour later. All the PowerPoint slides that she's going to go through, she physically prints them out for him onto a dark coloured paper, like navy blue, and she does a different font. And she gives them to him before she puts them on his desk. She has a quick word with him and tells him that she's put them on. And then she goes up to him a few minutes later as everyone's doing the work, and she says, is this better? And he was really thankful because he was like, that he was able to do everything. Then he was like one of the fastest people getting all the formulas done. And it was that 3-4 minutes that it took her to do that really focused on him having a good day and actually being able to keep up with what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, it really matters on our perception, how we focus on people as well. So what does inclusion mean? So inclusion is in the simplest term, it just means making sure that every child or young person or adult, no matter what their individual needs or barriers to learning are, have equal success to learning and the same opportunities to achieve as everybody else. Now, we know in schools we do a lot of things for inclusion. We have, in high schools, we've got different like barrier-free zones where you've got learners who might have be within a wheelchair or have learning difficulties. They can go and work in that area, which for one-to-one learning, things getting broken down. We've got specialist schools, so there's loads of resources out and about, even within our own schools. We have additional support for children that need it. So in total, it's just about creating a learning environment that works for everybody. So whether they've got a disability, can't speak English, have additional language, they're from a minority community, have low income, or even basic has somebody finding it just harder to learn. Not everybody is able to learn at the same pace, regardless if they have a learning difficulty or not. Some people will catch it on a lot quicker, and some won't. So it really can be anything. So we've got some inclusive classroom strategies. So again, classrooms, adult or child, we're all in the classroom behaviour within this. So we're in a virtual classroom right now at the moment. But in here, just make sure that you define your clear minimum standards for behaviour. So again, at the beginning of the year, you'll go through classroom rules and you'll be quite strict with the younger ones when they first transition into your class, because you want to set a basis over them. You're not going to give them as much leeway because you know that if you nip it in the bud now, it'll be easier later on. You're enforcing these standards consistently, especially in the first few weeks whilst everyone's learning. You're going to deal with children, and I should have put adults, who misbehave in a sensitive way. So I've been in, I've seen children classroom environment for many years, but I've also been in the physical adult classrooms where I'm a student as well. And there are times where you get giddy or you just can't stop laughing because you've had an in-joke that's happened, or you're just being silly, and you do, or if you're a bit upset. But there are things sometimes, even as adults, we can be silly and we can be insensitive as well. So we've got to try and deal with those. Create opportunities to listen to all of your learners. Now, I used to love doing this, is whenever I got one of my little ones come up to me, I'd bend down to their level, because they're not, especially if they're quite young, like in nursery or reception, they're not going to be wanting looking upwards at you. So if you go down to their level, you probably, they're going to be more comfortable talking to you.
Yeah.
And I know it's not very PC, but with the little ones, even if they're upset and you sit them in your lap and you give them a bit of a cuddle, that's fine as well. Now, develop a scaffolded approach to learning, and I've got a slide that goes over what scaffolded is, because I'm not sure if you've come over that term before or not. Be aware of the specific needs of every child in your class, and if you're working with them 9 months, you will get to know this. Provide support for them in ways which will benefit all of the children in your class, and then create a calm and purposeful learning environment. Clearly display timetables and key information. So have your timetable up, let the children know at the beginning of the day what you're going to be doing. And then also, if you've got children that have EAL or they've got learning needs, you can have picture timetables where it just shows you doing PE, this is your lunch, this is your break, and it gives them that visual there. This happens quite often now, so use pre-assessment to inform your planning. So before you even have the students come into your classroom, there'll be assessments that are carried out. Now, I know with yourself, you've done some assessments, you've looked at your learning styles. Right in the beginning, I asked you to fill out a personal development plan and a SWOT, strengths and weaknesses. So within that, I've got a nice idea of what your plans are, what you've done, and what you're focusing towards. And again, let the children or the learners choose to show you what, choose how they want to show you what they've learned. Again, they can talk to you, they can physically write something down for you, they can make some pictures, And then again, this is a very important one. Don't compare anyone's progress to another person, because everybody progresses in a different way. I will progress in a different way from, say, what some of my colleagues might do. I have 3 children. All 3 children are progressing in different standards. And if I was to say to one of them, oh, this one does this and is good at this, why are you not good at that? You're putting them down. So, again, personal progress is a key within this. You want to encourage them and not put them down. Because somebody might have worked really hard to get, say if they've got 10 questions in maths and they've only got 2 right. They might have worked really hard to make sure that those 2 were right. There might be progression from them getting 0 right a week before. So it's always nice to encourage them. And now the scaffolded approach. So I just wanted to go over this. Now, the scaffolded approach is just quite basic, really. It's just about the support you give to your student, as an instructor, as a teacher, as a mentor, is how you support them through the learning process. It's quite tailored and differentiated to each student. So the support I'll give you might be slightly different to the support I give somebody else, or then another learner. I teach healthcare as well, and I've got some students that will do independent learning, and they'll just get in touch with me or ask me to do a 1-hour session with them every few weeks to go over a topic. And then with some of the other students, I'll be going over a topic like 4 or 5 times a week, or we contact them on WhatsApp or phone or email. So it really depends on what sort of support you tailor it depending on your students' needs. And then again, it's just there to help your students to experience student-centered learning. So rather than it being teacher-centered, it's more student-centered. So you'd give them feedbacks, you'd give them hints, you'd instruct them, you'd explain about certain things to them, you'd model for them, and then you'll actually ask questions to students so that they can give you a good answer that has active linguistic and cognitive answers, so that they can actually think about what you've talked about, and it'll help to develop them for the workforce as well as they get older. And then, is that okay for the scaffolded approach?
Yeah.
So do you have any questions before I go over the tips section? Sorry, Lisa, are you okay in this section?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So for the tips for here, for 1.2, just start off by explaining why inclusion is important, and then put down what strategies you're setting users to promote inclusion. So have a nice paragraph with that, and then include a detailed example of a time you created an inclusive teaching and learning environment. So even if you did or didn't do it, you can put it down as if you did. So what did you do? How did this make you? How this made you and your learners feel? So did it promote? If you say, for example, promoted a certain celebration, or if there was an issue where somebody wasn't getting. I remember there was a little boy who joined the class. He when we started year 1, I think it was. And he hadn't been in reception or nursery with those children. But he came in and he liked to play with pink things. He liked to dress up in the dress-up section, but he liked to wear the princess outfits or walk around with those twirly things. And all the other kids made fun of him. And, he loved doing this. And it was getting to the point where he was really wanting to do those things, but he was trying to stop himself. So instead of saying that you should limit yourself and say, no, you don't do this, don't put these dresses on, because children are free to explore. It doesn't mean anything if they want to a boy wants to wear up a princess costume or walk around and, draw certain things or likes the color pink or purple. Instead of that, what we did was we just had a chat with all of the boys and the girls in the class, and we explained different things. And then we had 3 members of staff at that time, and all of us said the different things that we like to do that weren't typical for us being female or male. And then the kids sort of understand, oh, it's okay. And then later on, they'd actually, the girls started joining in. They'd wear their costumes and they'd run around with them. The boys would get those big ribbony, twirly things and they'd run around. So it didn't stop everything, but he started to get included into things, and he wasn't getting fun made out of him as often as what was. But in that, the children were able to learn new things, that it's okay for a boy to play with dolls and a girl to go and do climbing frames or football and any of those things. Those characteristics that people think that a boy is allowed to do this and a girl is allowed to do that. We're like, no, you're allowed to do anything you want. So it made him feel included. He was happier, and his parents were happier as well, because he wasn't upset when he went home and he wasn't complaining about certain things.
Yeah.
So the whole point of that was, so use an example of how you support someone to have an inclusive environment, and then what did it make you and your students feel? Were you happy that you did it? Were you thinking, oh, I could have done it a little bit better, or maybe I should have done that sooner? Because that's what I thought. I was like, why didn't I speak about this a lot sooner? Why did I have weeks and weeks of this go on? Do you feel joyful, interested, learn new things? Were you welcomed? the students feel belonged, that they're part of the class. So just talk about how you actually felt as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So on to the last section, 1.3. So demonstrate an inclusive approach to teaching and learning in accordance with internal and external requirements. So again, inclusive approaches to teaching. So it's just a cooperative relationship between your learners and the teachers, while you're keeping ahead of internal and external requirements. Now, you'll have a lot of internal and external requirements that you've got to follow within a school setting. So when it comes to teaching, there's lots of standards that need to be followed. And depending on your quality of teaching, what you're teaching, how you're doing it. So you'll follow the school's policies, procedures, teaching standards, the curriculum, and also if, like for me, I'm doing the adult teaching now, I'll make sure that I'm keeping ahead, that I'm teaching to the standards that the course requires, and that when I'm marking your work, that I'm marking it in respect to what the standards are. Because you could have done a fantastic piece of work and I'd be really happy with it, but there'd be no point in me being happy with it and saying, oh, this is great, you did fantastic, if it doesn't meet any of the standards in that part. So you're making sure you follow all that.
Yeah.
So you've got internal requirements, so requirements that are in your own settings. So your organizational policies. So you'll have an ethos of your setting. So my kids' school, their ethos is caring, sharing school. So that type of thing. Then you've got your teaching standards within your setting. Then you've got your senior leadership team, so you're going to follow what they say to you. Then you've got your school governors or your school council. It depends on what the school, I think they're more called school governors now. And what are they setting in place? Are they trying to promote certain inclusion activities? Are they trying to get more parent involvement? So these type of things. So can you think of any other internal requirements within your school? It's okay if you can't, because we've covered quite a few on here.
Okay.
Yeah, the only one I will add is your teaching style. So, for example, if you've got a two-setting place where you've got 2 year ones or 2 year twos or a 3-form or a 2-form, I think we call it, is if you're working to a certain standard in 1 year 1 class and then the other year 1 class is doing a certain standard, or year 5 and year 5, the both teachers are working separately, it's not going to work, is it? So you need to make sure your teaching styles actually match as well, so that you're working in cohesion with your fellow colleagues as you're going on. So that's the only thing I would add.
Okay.
Then you've got your external requirements, so your national curriculum, if you're doing adult teaching, your standards and the specifications of the awarding bodies like OTHM, ATHE and so on. Then you've got your local education body, and then you've got your Department of Education. And can you think of anything external on here?
Like cash? As they observe, do the visits to the school.
Yeah.
See if it's secure, safe environment for the children and others as well.
And again, Ofsted, they do something similar as well with Ofsted.
Sorry, Ofsted, not cash. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. And then you can also have your local council as well, because your local council will dictate what sort of, they'll do the intake and outtake of who is going to actually be given a space in school, don't they? And then obviously you're adapting your requirements in regards to those students' needs then as well. And then when it comes to teaching, there's so many standards that need to be followed and so many standards that you need to meet in regards to your quality of teaching and the subject matter. There's certain things that you've got to make sure that you're doing on a daily basis, which might only take a couple of minutes extra of your time, but those couple of minutes do always add up. So there's so many things that you have to try and adapt yourself to do. It's quite a difficult job to do, multi-purpose and juggle everything. You're following school policies and procedures, you're teaching all the standards, you're teaching the curriculum of the subject. You're making sure that you're keeping in touch with your homework policies, child protection, that if you've got healthy eating, that you're trying to keep an eye on that at break times, behavior policies, first aid, SEN, all of these type of things. Data protection. So there's so many things that you're following, and it can become quite a big job, but as you get used to it, as you keep doing it, you do it unconsciously as it happens anyway. So we're going to go on to the tip section in a second. Do you have any questions, anything you want to add to here?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So on here for tips to answer 1.3. So because this is a demonstrate, because the actual keyword here is demonstrate, you're going to use present tenses in here. So you need to demonstrate how you use an inclusive approach in your setting while you're still following the guidelines of internal and external requirements. So again, put down how you do inclusive approaches. Put down how you follow the code of conduct. Make sure that you're talking about you're following the teacher standards and that you're following the rules and guidance that have been set in place by your management for your key stage. Then talk about how you follow the national curriculum. And then after that, I'd mention that you're keeping in line with Ofsted standards and that you've got your external requirements, which is the national curriculum and the Ofsted within that. So that's how you do it. But again, use the present tense, because if you don't use the present tense, you'll have to change certain words out of it. So instead of like say I did or we did this or we taught this, say I teach, I do, I can, I give. So make it present. It's hard to do because you automatically go back into the past when you're talking about example, but just make sure you're doing it at this.
Okay.
So, to cap off, include an example of what you do to create an inclusive approach in your setting. Talk about, because you've already had a section where you've talked about your internal and external guidelines, that's fine. In this section, you're just going to put an example of how you do it and make sure it's present tenses.
Okay.
So does that make sense? Are you okay with this?
Yes, I am fine with it.
Brilliant. So that was all we're going to talk about on this. So let's have a little recap on what we've looked at. So we've looked at the effectiveness, I can't talk today, the effectiveness of teaching and learning approaches in your own specialism, so your primary school, and how you meet the needs of individual learners, how you create an inclusive teaching and learning environment, and then you're going to demonstrate using present tenses an inclusive approach to teaching and learning within the standards of internal and external requirements.
Okay.
So do you want to go over anything on here?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, so let me just tip this off.